Hi there, welcome back to another live lesson. I'm Gemma from OCAD, the Online College of Art and Design. It's lovely to see you again. We've had a summer break, so we're coming straight back in now with our 10th lesson. Okay, so task 10, as I put on the Facebook group, task 10 is all about Paul Cezanne. So we're going to be looking at famous artists throughout the next few tasks. We'll dip in and out of all different artist styles to learn from them and to just get some more ideas and develop our painting style. So we are building on from the previous lessons, but I'll recap some of the points that we've made, and if you're just starting with us right now, then it's absolutely fine to just jump on board and have a go at this one. You can always go back to the other ones. So we're going to look at how Paul Cezanne's style created his painting so that we can borrow his influences, his inspiration to produce our own painting. So when we say we're copying an artist, we're never really copying an artist. We're being inspired by an artist. We couldn't really say I could copy Paul Cezanne. I would never be able to do that. But I can be inspired. I can learn from his techniques and I can apply them to my work, just so I can develop a style and a bigger understanding. So we're going to start by looking at how he uses colour. Now we've covered colour already and complementary colours and how to use them, but for this artist we know that he would use slabs of colour. You'll see if you look at some of his art that I put on the blog, you'll see that he uses colour in a very blocky, patchy way. He wasn't so much of an impressionist, although his style you would think is kind of along those lines. He was way more modern. He was a highly modern artist, so the artists at the time, like many artists' backgrounds and stories, they were dismissed early on for their highly controversial or different approach to art, which now we understand and now we can fully appreciate. So what else? So blocks of colour. Now this has taken me maybe about 40-45 minutes to get to this stage. He layers, lots of thick layers on top of one another. It's very gestural. It's we're not trying to blend. We're not trying to get it really perfect. And as you can see, the impressionist kind of approach to this are these blue outlines. So how to start this off is I sketched just the basic forms first. I've got the objects in front of me, so I did a basic sketch first, and now I'm filling in the details. So I kind of started to fill in the bottom, but I thought I'd stop and I would show you from there how I'd get to the level of detail that we wanted. So plain colour first, slab of colour as you can see, and then we'll build on from there. If you want to do a gestural drawing first with something like charcoal, that's an idea, because you can then see where the shadows are going to be and you can see where some highlights are going to be. So it's worth it. It's worth doing a quick sketch first to then go on to this afterwards. But yeah, that's how I started anyway. Just a sketch, okay, from a real life observation. The objects are in front of me here. Now, what objects to choose? He obviously did lots of fruit, and then he did lots of bottles and things like that to kind of draw the eye up. You'll see on his artwork how he did it. He wasn't obviously too picky on perspective. You'll see some of his tables, they look like they're leaning towards you, so you can focus on those objects. They look like they'd almost roll off the table. Or his compositions, the apples and peaches and things, were right on the edge of the table, looking like they're about to fall off. So we're not really too worried about the composition today. We're more concerned about adding his style to an artwork to see if we can learn from it and break free from trying to be too perfect. Okay, we're kind of just going to do some brush strokes and see where we go. In terms of form, now Cezanne used to draw things so intently. An artwork, it says, would take him a long time. He would spend hours, years on a painting, okay, to get it right. He would move his easel after doing one viewpoint, move it slightly, and then draw it from that point of view. So he really studied his subjects that were in front of him. So that's not like the Impressionists that would draw an impression and just kind of go with what they were seeing in kind of a loose way. He would study the subject, so that's why he wasn't really an impressionist. He was very particular about his shapes and what he was looking at and the understanding he had of his subject. Another thing was Cezanne was famous for saying everything, every object is reduced to a universal form. Okay, so this is why right back on lesson 2 we looked at universal forms, because it is understood that if you can shade and add the tonal values to each of the universal forms, you can then apply it to any shape out there. So we started with the cube, the cylinder, the cone and the sphere. Okay, so you've got 4 universal forms. Now everything that you now draw links to those universal forms. Apples are spheres. The bottle here is a cylinder in its form, in its shape. So in learning that right at the beginning, we can now apply that now that we're adding colour. And Cezanne used to do that. He would really study the forms and their relationship between each other on the page and in his composition. Okay, so you'd see lots of spheres in, he did lots of fruits, but he'd complement that with a different form in the arrangement, so like a bottle, for example. So there's lots of analysis you can do on his artwork. There's a couple that are on the blog, just to get you thinking a bit more and see things from his point of view. Some things have a lot of meaning, some things have a lot of intention that you don't always see. Now we're just literally going to pick up on technique, all right, and we're going to do it from there. Now, a lot of the artists at the time would be painting out in the air, plein air painting, so they'd be outside. Now, Cezanne preferred his studio, so he would work from indoors, okay? So he would work from objects, and his colours were quite dark because of that. He would use quite dark tones in his work. But as he got later on, he got inspired and met more artists, so Pissarro, Monet, he would go outside, and you can see he does have some landscape paintings, and his colours got much brighter from doing that, from working way out in the natural light. So it is worth always doing that. Your colours do become more vivid. But yeah, he'd always fall out, I've read, with the Impressionists. They didn't like him. They tried to get him banned from an exhibition and things like that. He was just different. So we're going to try and copy his style now and see if we can take some inspiration and get some more gestural strokes into our work. Now, when I was starting off, literally, I was just filling this with a block of colour. So I'll just do that. Nice and easy. I'm not too worried about the form right now. It's gone a bit dark because of what the layer underneath has dried, of course. Now I'm using gouache. He did used to use gouache, watercolours as well. It doesn't really matter. Some people would prefer oils because they take a long time to dry, so you can really work into them maybe. But acrylics are just as good. Gouache is a bit of a mixture. It's a bit like watercolour and acrylic both together, really. So I'm just filling it in. But as you can see, I just, out of habit now, start to follow the form. Now, from the beginning, if you remember, we were doing how to shade in a universal form. So, for example, if my shadow is going to be here, when I'm adding just that darker bit, I'm curving, because this is a curved shape. It's a cylinder. It's a cylindrical shape. So I'm kind of arching my brush strokes. If you start to paint in straight lines like this, it will lose its illusion of it being three-dimensional. So we want to keep that up. We want to just always have these curved strokes. As I say, this is all about building up, really, and it's about when things are still not quite right, not giving up on it. It's in progress, so you just have to keep building and building. There was a stage where I was getting really sick of these apples, but they're starting to take shape now. You can see the strokes are rounded because it's a sphere, so every stroke you do in every direction on a sphere is going to be rounded. So just make sure you really emphasize the form. I might add a bit more down here just to show you. I don't want my brush too wet. So for example, you just want to keep curving, curving, curving in all directions, and you will create more form on your shape, for example. Okay, So with the blue, he would dab as well. He'd do lots of dabbing to get the texture in. You can see his brush strokes on his artwork. We're not trying to blend them all out. We're keeping them very loose on the page, okay? So this is what we mean by learning from an artist. Looking at their work, reading up on their style, and then applying it to your own work, okay? If you try and copy, it won't always work out, and you're not actually observing an object in real life then, and it will become maybe flat because you haven't got all those tones in front of you. So I always recommend just setting up your own composition. Follow some of the rules, things like rule of odds. I've kind of made sure I've got an odd number just to add a bit of interest. Otherwise, when someone views this painting later on, they'll see, they'll be trying to pair it. If it's an even number, it's thought that psychologically you'll be pairing up your, the objects that are on your page, and it'll make it not as interesting for a viewer. So an odd number, it's called rule of odds. I just want to make sure this is curved down the bottom, because if you flatten any of this detail like there, can you see that? If you try and flatten that, it will, the whole shape will go flat. So there you go, you can see it's coming together. I've got my basic blue, so let's get some highlight in there. So again, very gestural, and I'm just going to literally put it on quite thick just to see what happens. Curving, of course, to give the illusion that this is a rounded shape. Now it takes some time on a bottle. We're just going to build it up and see what happens. Now if we go back to the colour wheel, what Cezanne used to do to make forms really stand out is use complementary colours, the ones that are opposite each other on the colour wheel. If you do that, then the colours will be even more vivid on the page because they're standing right next to their complement, their opposite on the colour wheel. So the colours will be more vibrant, they'll stand out from the page a lot more. So that's something to bear in mind with even with the objects that you choose. You can shade using the complementary, so I could have added the complementary to bright red would be green. So you could add green tonal elements into here and the colours would really be more vivid. But the same as the bottle next to an object, you might want to find, with blue it's yellow, so the highlights of the apple might be right up next to a blue bottle or something like that. The complements will make the colours even more vivid. If you don't use complements, they'll kind of all blend on the page. It'll become harmonious, it might still work, but we're learning from this guy, and he did it that way, so I've been doing some complementary colour combinations just to see. So you get the idea. I'm just adding tone now. I know this should be dark here. I can see it from my picture, my composition in front of me, my object. So this is going to be darker here. So I'm just again adding strokes. It's kind of blending a bit. We want to be a little bit more gestural. I don't know if you can see my brush strokes still. They are there, but it is blending a bit. You see a bit of shadow back there. There we go. So yeah, gestures, thick paint, just layering up. Just keep those lines curved to just keep the form round, okay? Really important. As soon as you're just going backwards and forwards, it's going to lose its shape. So remember that's from one of our first lessons. So if you didn't do that, just remember that now while you're having a go. Right, a bottle like this would have a shine going all the way down the side, wouldn't it, like a straight line. If you put it on too thick, just go over with another colour. Let's just blend that back out, but keeping the brush strokes there. And as you can see, what Cezanne used to then do was keep redefining his forms by going over the outlines again. You see, I painted this in a blue outline first, so you know, to redefine some of these shapes, you might want to go back around the edges of them where they might have lost their definition and just put those back in. There we go. So you can see it's just building up. There's still some more work to do on here. I'm not completely happy with this yet. It just needs more. It just needs more strokes, more colours, more definition around the outside, but it's coming together. It's starting to show tone, as you can see, so it's getting there. We can add some backgrounds again, be very gestural with your strokes. Think about the colour. I'm not decided yet. I might go orange, something like that, yellows and oranges. The thing is, I'm just deciding this because this is blue and that it'll make it really vivid, but you know, it's up to you. Now with the apples, I could show you again using this one down here how I got to this stage, maybe, so you can see. We've done the cylinder and you can see my strokes are literally just arched all the way down. They never just go backwards and forwards. You can see the detail on the top. There's a lot needed yet. You go into much more detail. But yeah, you just build it up and up and up, and then we can define the edges again. That's what I'll do with the bottle. Now for the apple then. So I'm just going to start that again, just to show you how I got to it. So as I say, we're going to be influenced by a few artists. There's not an end to this activity. You just want to keep going. You might find an artist that you really like, that inspires you. Learn about them. You know, find out what their style is, look up close to their art if you can, if you're lucky enough to go to a gallery, or you can find them online and just see what their brushstrokes look like. Learn from them. Right then, very basic outline. I'm going to draw this back in. It's exactly what Cezanne would have done. Whether he would have outlined them first, I'm not too sure, but it's going to give the impression like what he created, so I'm going to go for it. You could just define it afterwards if you want, put blocks of colour and then outline if you wish. There we go. Put some detail here, just so we can see where that came in. Okay, so I'm going to fill this one in now from what I know about his style. Right, blocks of colour. Not too watery, otherwise it's going to run down your page or your canvas. Blocks not being too precious. I'm curving them. It might be out of habit, but I suppose you don't really need to worry about arching your colour when it's just the first coat, but it's always good practice. You never know, some of this colour might show through and some of those lines, so let me just fill this in. So quite a dry brush I'm using for this. I'm not using an expensive brush or anything fancy either. I mean, if you do, obviously your equipment, the better your equipment, you'll see the benefits of it, but just so you know, I'm using pretty cheap stuff. There we go. Okay, so I haven't added any tone. I've literally just coloured it in. It's picked up some of the blue from the wet outline, but that's fine. I'm going to build up on it anyway. Right then, so other colours. I'm thinking I'm going to need brown because I want some darker tone in there. So, you know, the darker shade of red is going to be brown, so I'll add some brown in there. Then obviously the other side of the colour wheel, the colours that it blends into, oranges, yellows. I've got a bit of yellow still on my palette. Oh, it's going to be dry, I'll add a bit more. So, doesn't really matter what colours really. As you can see, haven't been observing my composition much. You should be referring to it all the time. I just want to give you an example of one. If I was observing it and seeing the light, it would be more successful, I promise you. So I'll just show you. Right then, highlights. Where's highlights going to be? They're around the front of here. Maybe they'll be coming a bit more around the side on this one. Okay. My window is over there, so that's why it's taking the light over onto this side. Right then. So, the red paint is still wet, as you can see, so I'm literally just adding quite a lot, quite a thick loaded brush, just to get some of this colour on the top here. There we go. As I say, it took about 40 minutes to get to this stage, so you can see how it builds up and you just think nothing's happening. You know, I'm not too pleased with it yet, but you're just getting blocks of colour. Dab if you want to get the colours right. And just make sure now when you're adding these bits that you're really curving your strokes, because obviously it's a sphere and we're following the contours of the shape to give that illusion that it's round. Now, range of tone is going to be important. Now, I've got yellow to brown. The yellow's blending in a little bit because it's still wet underneath. But it's blending a bit. You can see some of the brush strokes. See it coming together on the picture? If you say complementary colours, you could add maybe some green. Here's some green just going on there now. Let me just show you. It's going to make these colours really go quite vivid. I didn't add green on the other apples, I just fancied to do it then. I thought I would. Add it with blue. Complementary colours do mix to make brown, so you're going to get tone if you use complementary colours anyway. You see that tone coming together? It's really dark down here, isn't it? It's the same on my picture. Now, as light is changing throughout the day when you're doing a painting, taking photos is, you know, a modern benefit that we've got now. You can take a photo and then refer to that, can't you? As the light's changing, your shadows might change. Instead of stopping completely, you might just be referring to your photo as well as the objects in front of you as the light changes. You could even change that photo to black and white. I think we've mentioned that before, so that you've got that tonal scale, especially if you're doing one of the original tasks, which is using just black and white. We've only really been looking at colour since task 8, okay? So until then, it was all tonal drawings. But the same principle with this, if you needed to really see where the dark highlights, the dark tones and the bright highlights were, then you could be looking at a photo that's been turned black and white of what you're observing, just so you can really pick out those darker areas. So it's coming together, it's getting there. I'm getting some more highlight here. Obviously with the stalk here, there's a lot more tone to go, a lot more texture to add in. I'm going to want some, my apples have got some texture around the edges here, so that would come in just to give it a bit more form as well. When it's dried enough, if you've got acrylic or oils, you can really layer them, can't you? With gouache, that watercolour quality, that's kind of blending on the page a little bit. But I'll see. I've got a lot of white on my brush. Let's just see. It's around here. Let's just put some curved white. Is that showing up on there? Can you see? It's making it brighter. Again, very gestural. Don't worry. It doesn't need to be blended. It doesn't need to be thin. You can have thick paint on your image there. Can you see that? Just a bit of shine on the side. I kind of was doing that here too, just to really bring out these areas. Now this is dry, that will really go on there bright. But just be careful, you've got to arch it. You've got to make sure that it doesn't lose its form. Keep them curved. Keep the lines curved. Okay, for example. Okay, so that's how I was building up anyway. That's how I was doing it. And if you can see, I've gone into the corner of my canvas, so it's probably a bit dark. And you see, it's getting there, it's getting there. There's still more work to do. I would still add some more layers. And don't forget your background. Your background is going to be important now because obviously there's going to be shadow down here. So when you're doing these bits, just don't be afraid to get it really dark. Observe your shadow from what's in front of you to see where it falls. Just want some more white. What's nice with backgrounds is you can really get to, you know, mix some colours, get some yellow in here. You could do anything. Very gestural. The background can just be lots of lines built up from lots of different colours, loaded on your brush like this, and just build it up. I've added a bit of yellow now, so I can take that through to this bit. But yeah, just lines, just to build it up. But again, there is tone around the outside of your shapes. Have a look. Is the background darker than your shape, or is there light reflecting back there? Is it light behind? The table looks a bit light for me around there. Okay, so the background's important because it's going to give your object a place. So don't forget the background too. There we go. You can just keep building that up. So I'll keep going with this, and later this week maybe I'll jump back online. We'll see how it's going and any other tips that we could possibly add to just finish off this artwork. But the main thing is that we're just having a go at the type of art that Paul Cezanne would have done. Okay, you see it's coming together, it's giving it a bit of a place, if that makes sense. Otherwise it's just a floating apple. So there's lots more I need to do to this. There's still lots more tone to add. Now don't be afraid to add black, okay, to give it a real punch, the real darkest tones. If I show you, for example, just with charcoal, you can see how this, just making this so much darker and giving it some shadow under here, is all of a sudden going to add more tonal value. Remember, the darks to the very bright highlights. Same here. Now that this is dry, let me show you. Put a bit of black in here. All of a sudden, you've darkened that shadow and it's given it more tone. Same here on this bit, the apple, we can define. Okay, so mixed media, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can add more tone and more details with pencils or anything you like. So that's it, that's Paul Cezanne. That's hopefully you found that useful, just to see how to get inspired by an artist and how he worked. As I say, he did go outside and use bright natural light, and his colours were brighter as a result of it. All depends kind of what you're taking your inspiration from. Look at his artwork, look at his style, and just see which work of art you've taken to and you think you'd like to be inspired by, and then go for it. He did lots of lovely landscapes that are quite impressionist, lots of blocks of bold colour, so that might be lovely if you've got a lovely setting you would like to go and explore. And then it takes you away from having to be really detailed. Looking at artists like this, it breaks you away from it. Many of my students, we would look at Monet, for example, when we're doing landscapes. We'd look at Van Gogh when we were doing portraits, just to give another side of things, another style to try, because we started off being very observing, weren't we, of our work, getting things to blend, getting things to look perfect. But you know, as long as we understand that and understand how the light works and how the forms work, we can now break away and do and try other styles, because you never know, you might come across a winner that you really like and think, right, that's my style, that's what I've been heading towards. Maybe, you know, the detailed graphite pencil wasn't for you. You understand it, but you know, maybe more of an impressionist or style like this would suit you. So give it a go, all right? I really encourage you to give this one a go, just to break away, as I say, from being too restricted on what you're painting. I think Paul Cezanne is a great example. He brings together all that we've learnt about form and tone and observing, and now colour, and how to use colour together to really make your objects vibrant, stand out, and how to make them obviously still three-dimensional. It's not too impressionist, is it? It's still real, but with a bit of an impressionist edge to it, so you know, it's not too perfect. So there you go, Paul Cezanne. Maybe we'll meet later on in the week to see how this is going and give you some more tips. I'm going to try and jump on by the end of the week. Okay, so I'll see you then, and then we can move on to our next task. All right then, have a great week. See you everyone.